In the last section, we created a new Elastic Beanstalk environment for our multi-container Docker application. It looks like my application has successfully been created, but before we start working with this thing at all, I want to have a quick discussion on something that it seems like we kind of left out in all of our Docker run file stuff and all of our Travis stuff so far as well. So inside of our Docker run file, like I said at the end of the last section, we appear to have no references to any containers that are running Postgres or Redis, as we had previously set up inside of the Docker compose file. So let's talk about why that is. All right, so I'm going to show you a couple diagrams. I want to first remind you about the overall architecture of our development environment. We had said, yeah, we got the Nginx, the Express, Worker, all that stuff. And then most notably, we had the Redis container and the Postgres container as well. So in the development environment, we were running these two data services inside of containers. But as we move over to a production environment, we're going to change up this architecture in a pretty significant way. Now, we're going to make this architecture change for a very good reason. So let me show you first a diagram that's going to tell you a little bit about the architecture, and then I'll tell you many reasons about why we're going to take this alternate approach in production. Okay, so first off, the diagram. Here's what our architecture is going to be in the production environment. So we're still going to have the Nginx routing server, the Nginx file server, the Express API, and the worker, and those are all going to be running inside of our Elastic Beanstalk instance. We've already wired up the definition for all four of these containers inside of that Docker run aws.json file. The instance of Redis and the instance of Postgres that are going to be serving data for our application, however, will not be inside of the Elastic Beanstalk instance. Instead, we are going to rely upon two external services to fulfill all of our data needs for our application. The two services that we're going to use are called AWS Relational Database Service, very frequently abbreviated as simply RDS, and Amazon Elastic Cache. These are two services that are kind of general in nature. And when I say general in nature, I mean that they're not customized specifically for using with Elastic Beanstalk. They're not customized to be specifically used with containers. They can be used with just about any type of application out there you can think of, whether or not it uses Elastic Beanstalk or whether or not it uses containers. So they are general data services that can be used with just about any application. All right, so let's talk about why we're going to be using these services to host our copy of Redis and our copy of Postgres. So there's a couple of very good reasons that we might choose to use these outside services rather than creating our own containers manually and using our own containers for housing Redis or our Postgres instances. So in the case of Elastic Cache, got a couple of very good reasons to use this service as opposed to making our own copy of Redis and hosting it inside of that instance. So first off, Elastic Cache is going to automatically create an instance of Redis for you. This is an absolute professional grade Redis. So it's got all the settings, all the configuration that you would ever expect to have in a production deployment of Redis. And the common theme here is going to be that there are many settings set up by default for you that are probably going to be very beneficial for your application that you might not even know exist. In other words, you and I might not be Redis experts. We might not really know how to use Redis properly in a production environment. But Amazon has a lot of engineers, like entire teams of engineers who are absolute like doctorates, like they have their PhD essentially on Redis, and they know exactly how to set this thing up for a production deployment or a production environment. And that's kind of the running theme around why we would choose to use these external services for managing all of our data. These teams at AWS, they know how to set this stuff up and they know how to manage it extremely well. Now above that, with Elastic Cache, it's extremely easy to scale. So as you might imagine, if our application one day got really, really popular and we saw that for whatever reason our Redis instance was crashing all the time because our container or the hardware allocated to our container was insufficient, well, that might be a little bit of a pain for you and I to scale. We would have to figure out some way to allocate more resources to the container. We would have to figure out some way to restart the container without losing any data. Definitely a little bit of a headache there. But with Elastic Cache, we can essentially just say, hey, I think we need some more hardware here. I think that we need to upgrade the amount of memory or the processor or whatever it might be. And Elastic Cache is going to automatically manage that upgrade path for you. And you don't have to worry about doing a bunch of manual configuration or stuff like that. We get built-in logging, built-in maintenance. If there are security patches around Redis, AWS is going to automatically apply them for you. You're going to get automatic logs generated. You don't have to worry about getting logs out of your container and somehow reporting them to some outside service. In addition, very closely related to the first item up here that we spoke about, we're definitely concerned about security inside of our application, and we've done a couple of things to upgrade the security of our containers. However, with Elastic Cache, chances are they probably have a better idea around security than we do. And so I kind of feel a little bit more comfortable kind of delegating all these responsibilities off to AWS rather than trying to manage security on my own for this particular service. Now, this last one right here, this is one of the real big ticket items. This is one of the big reasons that you might choose to use one of these outside data services. We have a application architecture set up right now that is completely reliant upon Elastic Beanstalk and totally reliant upon making use of containers. I don't know what our application lifecycle is going to be. In other words, I don't know how long my application might need to be deployed and maintained. It's entirely feasible that at some point in time in the future, we might decide to migrate off Elastic Beanstalk and go off to some other service. And when we do that migration, it's going to be a lot easier to migrate away if we are making use of Elastic Cache, because it's completely decoupled from Elastic Beanstalk. Elastic Cache doesn't care where you're making a connection to it from. It could be from Elastic Beanstalk, it could be from some Kubernetes cluster, it could be from some random EC2 instance. All Elastic Cache cares about is that you are making a connection to it. And so it'll be much easier to make changes to our application in the future or entirely change the architecture if we're making use of this outside service. Now, essentially all the same points apply to the relational database service as well. Everything totally related as well. Yeah, they got these teams who know really well how to set up Postgres for production deployments. They make it really easy to scale, log, security. Now, the real big ticket item here, however, is this point right here. So something that does not get very frequently covered in a lot of courses, even courses that I make, is making backups of your database. In other words, making a backup of all the records in your database in case anything goes wrong at some point in the future. Setting up automated backups is not the easiest thing in the world, and in many cases, if you want to get some easy service to do it for you, you actually have to pay a little bit extra for that. And I'm talking about if you're using like a third-party add-on that's going to attach to your container and make automated backups or whatever might need to happen. AWS RDS, or Relational Database Services, has automated systems for taking backups for you. And if you ever decide, oh no, we've got some data corruption or we did something really wrong inside of our application in the production environment, it's like 1 or 2 button clicks to roll back your database to one of those backups. And so with AWS RDS, it makes life just incredibly easy when you start thinking about maintenance of data and data security. So that's kind of my spiel. It might sound like I'm a huge fanboy of AWS or something like that. In reality, no, I'm not a huge fan of AWS one bit. To be totally honest with you, I think that many aspects of it are rather challenging to work with. I'm not the biggest fan. However, I still do recommend making use of these outside services anytime that you're working with, say, Postgres or Redis or Memcache or any type of outside data service. I do recommend that you try making use of these services wherever possible because they're going to do a lot of stuff for you that is by default kind of challenging to do on your own. Now, one last thing I want to say here, yes, these services do cost a little bit of extra money, but to be honest, if you're making a serious application, we're talking about like dollars per month for running a Postgres instance and dollars per month of running a Redis instance. As a software engineer, your time is worth money, and it might take you an entire day or entire week to set up and maintain Postgres and Redis in a very appropriate fashion inside of Elastic Beanstalk. And so that one day or that 1 week, well, that time that you're spending, that is money. Your time is worth money. And so at the end of the day, it kind of is worth justifying to say, yeah, we're going to spend like $10 or $20 per month on a Postgres instance hosted through RDS rather than trying to maintain it on our own. All right, now very last thing I want to say here. So having said all that, yeah, I'm kind of advocating making use of these automated services, but having said all that, this is a course about getting an application running using containers. So Our next project is going to set up Redis and Postgres in a production environment from scratch. We're not going to make use of any external service. So although I do recommend that you use the external services, I still want you to understand how we can set up an application that doesn't use them at all if you want to essentially strike it out on your own. Or if you're ever hosting on an environment that doesn't provide these kind of managed solutions. For example, let's say DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean doesn't have automatically managed copies of Redis or Postgres available, and you would have to manage those instances yourself. So we are going to go through an example of how you would set all this stuff up on your own in a production environment as well. But at the same time, in this example, I want to show you, I just want to show you both ways. That's pretty much what it comes down to. Okay, so enough of me rambling on about this. Let's take a quick pause right here. When we come back in the next section, we're going to start setting up an instance of Elastic Cache, instance with relational database services, and then learn how to wire them up over to Elastic Beanstalk. So quick break, and I'll see you in just a minute.